Hello students, we are ready with our next video. In today's video, we will discuss the carbohydrates, a most important topic, carbohydrates. Approximately 10 marks of questions are mainly asked from this section in our paper of approximately 50 marks total. So it carry approximately 1/5 mark carbohydrate important. So how we will go about that? We can discuss the carbohydrate portion in different parts. First, I will discuss the introduction part. Second part, I will discuss the classification part, in which I will broadly classify carbohydrate into three main categories. First is called the monosaccharide, second is called the oligosaccharide, third is called the polysaccharide. Then I will discuss a term which is called the DL nomenclature. Third point will be DL nomenclature of carbohydrates and sugar, and fourth will be reaction. The reaction part I will be discussing in the next video. In the introduction part, we will discuss the importance of this important molecule. Carbohydrates are, we can say, are one of the most abundant molecule found in nature. Plants are carbohydrates, grains are carbohydrates, trees are carbohydrates, jutes are carbohydrates, cotton are carbohydrates, foods are carbohydrates. So carbohydrate is a very broad term. We can say carbohydrate. I will not be wrong if I say carbohydrates are one of the most abundant molecules found in the nature. Carbohydrates are significant because they are source of energy. Carbohydrates are significant because they are storehouse of energy. They are source of energy in the form of starch, and they are source of energy in the form of cellulose. Carbohydrates, we can say, are the energy packet of our body system. Each molecule of sugar provides us some energy. So if we have to think of carbohydrate significance, they are everywhere. We can think of carbohydrate found almost everywhere. You just think of DNA. Our hereditary molecule is DNA. DNA is made up of deoxyribose nucleic acid. You just think of RNA, ribose nucleic acid. The ribose and deoxyribose are the sugar part. So we can. I'm just trying to explain what is the importance of sugar part, the carbohydrate part. The carbohydrates, if I have to define this term carbohydrate have two definition. First is the old definition. In old definition, they are defined as the carbohydrates of carbon, where we can write them as CxH2OY. It means they contain the compound. The compound are such that they contain the hydrogen and oxygen ratio as found in the water. So they are hydrates of carbon. It is the older definition of carbohydrates. Which are not generally accepted now, because there are many compounds which are found to be following this formula. Like we just think of formic acid, we just think of formaldehyde, we can think of acetic acid, we can think of lactic acid. All of them are following this type of formula. They contain CX and H2OY, but they are not carbohydrate. And similarly, there are many carbohydrates which are not following this formula CXH2OY, but still they are considered carbohydrate. So this definition is not relevant today. So we are moving toward the new definition. New definition is they are polyhydroxyaldehyde and they are polyhydroxyketones, and they are found to be optically active. This is the main part. They are found to be optically active compound. So this is the introduction of carbohydrate part. So we are now discussing the classification of sugar part. The classification of sugar part can be done on the basis of three different parameters. The first parameter is on the basis of chain length. What is the chain length? Whether they are long, whether they are short, whether they are monosaccharide. Or second way of classification is whether they are reducing in nature sugar, or whether sugar is non-reducing in nature. So third classification nature is whether the sugar is whether your carbohydrate part is sugar in nature, or whether carbohydrate is non-sugar in nature. So there are three different ways of classification: on the basis of chain length, on the basis of reducing in nature, and on the basis of whether they are sugar and non-sugar in the part. But I am just discussing the first part, the according to chain length. So according to chain length, we can classify sugar in three main branches. The first is called the monosaccharide, second is called the oligosaccharide, and third is called the polysaccharide. We just discussed, if I have to define the oligosaccharide is the smallest unit of any carbohydrate. It is the simplest unit of the monosaccharide. The monosaccharide is the simplest carbohydrate. It is like one carbohydrate part, monosaccharide part. Monosaccharide can be containing aldehyde group. If it is containing aldehyde group, it is called the aldose. If it is contain the ketone group, it is called the ketose. the monosaccharide can be aldehydic in nature, can be ketonic in nature. If we have to define the monosaccharide on the basis of chain length, they can be containing 3 carbon atom. If they contain 3 carbon atom, they are called triose. They contain 4 carbon atom, they are called tetrose. If they contain 5 carbon atom, they are called pentose. If they contain 6 carbon atom, they are called hexox. If they contain 7 carbon atom, they are called heptose. Mainly it is on the basis of the number of chain and the number of carbon in the chain, and it is mainly which contain the aldehyde part. Similarly, we can also have the carbohydrate, the monosaccharide which contain ketone, and the main example of this 6 carbon containing ketose is fructose. When we think of monosaccharide, the most common example of monosaccharide came to our mind is glucose and fructose, where glucose belongs to the C6 chain aldehydic part and fructose belong to C6 chain ketonic part. Other example we can think of mannose. Other example we can think of galactose. There are also a good example of C6 aldehydic part. And if we have to think of 5 carbon monosaccharide, then we can think of ribose, which is a part of RNA molecule, a very important hereditary molecule. And then we also think of arabinose. It is also example of a C5 aldehydic group. So their main monosaccharide. Monosaccharide means one sugar unit is called the monosaccharide, and monosaccharide can be aldehydic in nature, can be ketonic in nature. If aldehydic and ketonic in nature, they are classified on the basis of what is the number of carbon length, and accordingly we can classify this as a monosaccharide. Second is oligosaccharide. Oligo means, according to the Latin word oligos, it came from the word oligos, and oligos means few. In case of when we think of oligosaccharide, we just think of all those saccharides which contain monosaccharides. Number can be from monosaccharide can be from 2 units to 10 units. So they contain monosaccharide from 2 to 10 units. If 2 units of monosaccharides are there, they are called disaccharide. If 3 units of monosaccharides are there, they are called the trisaccharide, tetrasaccharide, pentasaccharide, hexasaccharide, heptasaccharide. It means what is the number of the monosaccharides per molecule. It is called the oligosaccharide. So we can have maximum up to 10 units of monosaccharides can be there in case of oligosaccharides. The important example of oligosaccharides are raffinose. Raffinose contain 3 different type of monosaccharides. First is glucose. It contain glucose. It contain galactose. And raffinose contain fructose also. So raffinose is an example of a trisaccharide containing 3 different type of sugar. And one thing you can take note of that is oligosaccharide. In case of oligosaccharide, the monosaccharide can be same or monosaccharide can be different. The other common oligosaccharides are, if I have to mention, they are maltose, they are lactose, they are sucrose. There are other common disaccharides. They are main important disaccharides containing 2 different type of sugar in their structure. Maltose contain 2 units of glucose. Lactose contain 1 galactose plus 1 glucose. Sucrose contain glucose plus fructose. Glucose plus fructose. So when we think of oligosaccharide, the most common example came to our mind are sucrose, maltose and lactose. Maltose is a sugar found in your we can say in your food, in your flour, grain flour. Or lactose is a sugar found in milk. It's called the lactose. Milk sugar is called the lactose, and sucrose is a sugar which is found in common table sugar. It is a common table sugar is called the sucrose. Okay, this is the classification according to the number of the monomeric unit present in your structure. And common are maltose, lactose, sucrose. Trisaccharides are glucose, galactose, fructose containing raffinose, and tetrasaccharides are tetrose. Now the third way of classification on the basis of chain length are polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are those saccharides which contain more than 10 units of sugar in the structure. They contain more than 10 units of sugar in the structure, and sugar may be same. They may be glucose, 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 or the sugar may be different. If they are same, polysaccharide contains same type of monomeric structure, they are called the homopolysaccharides. If they contain the different type of monomeric structure, one may be glucose, one may be galactose, just for example, and they are containing a long chain of polymeric structure, they are called the heteropolysaccharide. So polysaccharides are those saccharides which contain thousands of units of monosaccharides, and monosaccharides may be same. If they are same, they are called homopolysaccharides. If they are not same, they are called the heteropolysaccharide. When we think of polysaccharide, the common example came to our mind are two main examples. First is the starch. Starch is a very common example of polysaccharide containing thousands of glucose units containing them. And second example came to our mind are cellulose. Cellulose and starch, you must remember, are one of the most common carbohydrate found in nature. So this is the classification on the basis of the chain length. This is second and third way of classification of carbohydrates and sugar compounds. The second classification on the basis of the reducing and non-reducing nature. Those sugar which can reduce some compound are called reducing, and those which cannot reduce other compound are called non-reducing in nature. Remember, all monosaccharides are reducing in nature, and in case of a non-reducing compound, when we think of non-reducing sugar, the most important example come to our mind is sucrose. Sucrose is the example of a very good example of a non-reducing sugar. So how do we classify whether they are reducing or non-reducing? We classify them on the basis of their reaction of the carbohydrates on the base with the three different reagents. First reagent is called the tolerance reagent. Tolerance reagent is ammoniacal silver nitrate solution, and second reagent is called the Fehling solution. Fehling solution is a mixture of two different solutions. First is called the Fehling A, which is a solution which you can say copper sulfate, and Fehling B. Fehling B is a sodium potassium tartrate, and third is Bandic solution. Bandic solution are the solution of sodium citrate plus copper sulfate. So these three different solutions are mainly used to distinguish saccharides, used to distinguish carbohydrates, whether they are reducing and non-reducing in nature. When we think of reducing sugar, if I have to give you one example is all monosaccharides are reducing in nature. If we have to think of disaccharides like maltose is a reducing sugar, and lactose, which is a milk sugar, lactose is also a reducing sugar. So these two are disaccharide, but they are reducing in nature, and all monosaccharides are reducing in nature. Third is the non-reducing case. In case of non-reducing sugar, important and the most common example is sucrose. A common table sugar is called the sucrose. And third way of classification is whether the sugar is called sugar part or non-sugary in nature. Carbohydrates are those carbohydrates which are mainly monosaccharides, or we can say they are also oligosaccharide to some extent. So sugars are those which can be monosaccharide or which can be oligosaccharides maximum, but non-sugars are those which are mainly polysaccharides. So polysaccharides are non-sugar. If we have to classify as non-sugar, non-sugars are polysaccharides. Starch, cellulose are polysaccharides. There is one main difference between we can say monosaccharide and polysaccharide. We can note down one main difference between these two is that monosaccharides are crystalline solid, water soluble compounds, and they are sweet in taste. One important point is that monosaccharides are crystalline solid, soluble in water, and they are sweet in taste, and polysaccharides are amorphous solid and they are tasteless and they are insoluble in water. This is the main difference between monosaccharides and polysaccharides. So we were discussing now about sugar and non-sugar part. So we can say sugars are monosaccharides for some oligosaccharides, and non-sugars are mainly polysaccharides. There is one important term in sugar chemistry, that is relative configuration, and which is called the DL configuration. In relative configuration is the configuration where we relate a compound with some standard compound, and that standard compound is, in case of sugar chemistry, that standard compound is D-glyceraldehyde. This D-glyceraldehyde is an example of a triose. It contains 1, 2 and 3 carbon. Therefore, the example of aldol triose. And this aldol triose contain, as you can see here, contain OH, contain one chiral center and contain OH on your right hand side and H on our left hand side. So this is all those compound, all those the glyceraldehyde where we have OH on the right hand side and H on the left hand side is called the D-glyceraldehyde. So this is the standard compound for assigning the absolute, assigning the relative configuration. This is common, most common, we can say one of the most common sugar, the glucose. This is the fructose, example of aldose, example of ketose, example of monosaccharides, common monosaccharides, aldose, glucose and fructose. So if I have to assign this as a D and L form, so how will I go about that? I simply have to do the assigning according to what is the nature of OH on the last chiral center. Last chiral center is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 carbon. So last chiral center is, we can say, is 5th. This is the last chiral center, or we can say the chiral center having the highest number. Highest number is having 5. It is having the 5 number. The highest chiral number carbon chiral center or the last chiral center, you just have to see its configuration. If it's contain OH on your right hand side, it means that your sugar is D sugar. So it is example of a D glucose, right? You just have to see whether it is whether this is your right hand side or left hand side. If it is right hand side, it is D glucose. If just consider the case of fructose. In case of fructose, again see, do the numbering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What is the highest number chiral center? Highest number chiral center is this. What is the stereochemistry of OH here? Stereochemistry of OH is that OH is on our right hand side. So this is the example of a D fructose. So this is called the D fructose. Similarly, you can take any monosaccharide and you can draw its Fischer. It's called the Fischer structure. It's called the Fischer configuration of monosaccharide. You can draw any, you can take any monosaccharide and draw its Fischer configuration and see what is the configuration of what is the side of OH in the last or the highest order chiral center, and assign accordingly D and L nomenclature. So it was about, today's lecture was about the introduction, it was about the classification, it was about the DL nomenclature of the sugar and the carbohydrate parts. So in the next section, in the next video, we will discuss the main reactions shown by the sugar. So with this, I am sure you must be clear with all these concepts I have introduced today. With this, I just say thank to all of you. Thank you.